Okay, so I'm not sure what page number we're on, but we are doing 2.3 minimum measurement congruent triangles 2. Today is March 7th. This goes into your table of contents, and for those of you guys with messy handwriting, lucky for you, this is a video. You can pause it, take your time, and write neatly. Make sure it ends up in your notebook correctly, please. All right. So March 7th, minimum measurements for congruent triangles 2. So we talked briefly about congruent triangles, very briefly, what congruent means. So your focus question is, what is the smallest number of sides and or angles measurements needed to conclude that two triangles are congruent? So when you see two triangles, what information is needed, just the lowest, smallest amount of information needed in order to prove that two of them are exactly the same or congruent. Okay. Now this part here, this first paragraph, this first couple sentences, you do not need to write in your notebook. It's just telling you what to do. This drawing can be seen on page 35 in your textbook, which I will load onto this page as well. Okay. Now before we move on, there's a couple of markings here that we need to make note of. Okay, so these are geometric markings used in geometry to identify congruent parts. Okay, so these hash marks here, okay, a single hash mark means that these sides are congruent. Okay, congruent side lengths or congruent side lengths. Okay, now the number of hash marks determines which ones are congruent to which. Because that's one hash mark each, this side is congruent to this side. If there are two hash marks, this one is congruent to this one. Okay, now that mark is still the same for angles as well. So if I have an angle mark, so if this marks an angle like it does here at angle B and angle Q, they are congruent and corresponding. So these are congruent angles. Okay, because they're on two separate shapes, they are also the corresponding angles. This angle B and angle Q are the same angles in corresponding congruent triangles. Okay, so briefly I'm going to color coordinate this. This side with 3 hash marks is going to be congruent to this side length. When I'm talking about side lengths, I'm talking about this length here. Okay, I'm talking about this length here. Okay. I'll pick another color, let's say orange. Angle A will be congruent to angle R, and I think we just need one more color. We'll do purple. Angle C is congruent to angle P. So you can see how they're paired up and matched up. Okay, this is important information here. You need to know this as you move on in the lesson. Okay. Now it says answer question A and B on page 35 by drawing examples of triangles that fit the description but are not congruent to each other. Okay, so you're actually proving the statement false. Okay. So let's take a look to see what that looks like. So page 35 looks like this. Okay, it says, can you be sure that two triangles are congruent if you know only one pair of congruent corresponding sides? So you're going to draw a triangle with one side length exactly the same, but they are not congruent. Okay, so that's what you're going to be sketching or drawing. You should have a ruler and a protractor to complete these activities. Okay, can you do the same thing with one pair of congruent corresponding angles? For example, if the only mark you can put on two separate triangles is equivalent angles, can you prove that those two triangles are congruent? Okay, you're disproving this by drawing non-congruent triangles with this with this restriction. Okay, we'll do the same thing for question B. It's just like question A, but instead of one pair, you get two pairs of each. Okay. Once you're finished with that, okay, you can work on question C through F, but you're gonna need a protractor and a ruler. Okay. Your lab sheet should have these pictures. So if you get lab sheet 2.3 congruent triangles, question C, you don't have to draw it. It draws it out for you, and you're gonna prove that these two are congruent. Okay. So this angle and this angle are corresponding and congruent to each other. This side and this side are corresponding and congruent to each other. And this angle and this angle are corresponding and congruent to each other. So can you prove or can you check that these two are congruent triangles? So let's double check to see that question. Question C says two pairs of congruent corresponding angles and one pair of congruent corresponding sides as shown. Use your understanding of transformations to justify. So can you transform this one onto that one and prove that they're the same? Okay, and it does much the same thing for the following shapes. You can use your descriptions of transformations, translations, rotations, and reflections to make sure that these are congruent shapes to each other. Okay, so are these congruent for D, E, and F? You're actually going to measure them out, or you can use your transformations. But I would measure them. I would measure each angle in each side and put the correct markings on there. Okay. Once you're finished with these questions, then you can watch the second video, but not until then. Okay. Then you can watch the second video. Okay, but not prior to that.